And then finally, with about 12 hours until ignition, everything was built, everything was assembled, everything was tested, and it was time to move the engine out to the test cell in the yard. We once again forklifted the engine and carefully manoeuvred it through the walkways in the factory with one of us on every corner, making sure that we didn't damage anything. For the first few low speed runs, so the lubrication tests, the cold cranking, and then the initial self-sustaining runs, we'd elected to turn the whole test rig round and just have it half in and half out of the container. We didn't need the acoustic deadening for those tests, and it was really important that the team could get in and around the engine during commissioning and during the setup for each of the tests, so that it was easy to work on. So we positioned the engine in that manner, and then started to connect up all of the services, the power, the lubrication system, the fuel system, and everything else that we needed to do with the instrumentation and control to be able to start the testing process. And then I'm particularly proud to say that I was the one that gave the very first GT50 engine its very first drink of Jet A1. With about 4 hours to go until ignition, the test rig and the engine were all connected up. The electrical power supply was connected up. The lubrication system was online. The cooling system was online. The instrumentation and the control system was online and responding. It was finally time to start shaking down some of these life support systems and control systems so that we could start the test program. The first engine system that we planned to test was the lubrication system, and that's for two reasons. Firstly, it's absolutely critical that we get sufficient cooling and sufficient lubrication to the high-speed bearings, because if we don't, then the rotor would seize very rapidly and essentially destroy the engine. It's also vital that we get just the right amount of oil in the engine, because counterintuitively, if you have too little oil, the engine, the bearings and the gears will get too hot as they generate too much friction and you can't get the heat away quickly. But perversely, if you put too much oil into the system, that also makes it worse. So what happens is if you've got too much oil in and around really high speed components, then the components rapidly froth up and foam up the oil, and that causes the gearbox casing to be full of like an oil air foam, which rapidly generates heat through viscous shear and friction against all of the components, and then that mechanism causes the bearings and the gears to overheat. So we're trying to find that delicate balance of just enough to lubricate and cool, but not too much that we start to build excessive oil foam that we can't effectively scavenge, and we then overheat the lubrication system that way. So that was very much part of this early wave of testing, is to get that set up just right. So we bought the air oil heat exchanger online, we bought the scavenge pumps online, we bought the pressure pumps online, and for a moment everything was great. It worked just fine. But before long, Mark noticed that there was a small leak coming from the rear of the engine. It looked like it was coming out of the rear bearing housing.
Leaked everywhere today. It was all over the floor, casing was dripping, it was all over. It was a right mess on it. It was, wasn't it? I think every possible place it could leak out of, it leaked out of it.
By this point, we'd been going for about 19 hours, and I can remember thinking to myself, I really hope it's not going to be one of those days. And I walked round to the front of the engine, and as I looked at the front of the engine, I could see there was actually oil coming out of an instrumentation port right at the top of the accessory gearbox, and it was coming out of the accessory gearbox air oil separator vent. Now, GT50 is a dry sump engine. There shouldn't be any residual oil in those casings. And so the moment I saw that, it was obvious that we'd for some we'd somehow managed to get the pressure and the scavenge rates wrong, and we were simply just pumping far too much oil in. We were pumping more oil in than we were scavenging out, and so it was just filling up every cavity in the engine. We were essentially force feeding our newborn engine with oil, and it's just not set up to cope with it. So we backed off shut down the pressure pump, we scavenged to clear out all the excess oil in the engine and shut the whole thing down. And then we systematically took off the feed lines and the scavenge lines and did some really simple bucket engineering to physically measure exactly what each of the pressure pumps and each of the scavenge pumps were delivering and returning. And we really quickly identified that we just weren't scavenging what we thought we were for some reason. We'd just got the pump set up wrong. When we worked that out, we were able to very quickly recalibrate them and run the scavenge pumps a little bit quicker, pressure pumps a little bit slower, and that completely rebalanced the system. And so we quickly calibrated that again, then reconnected up the engine, and we went again. While the production team had been diligently manufacturing the last few components and then painstakingly assembling the engine, developing the fixtures and fitting out all the instrumentation, my attention had turned to how exactly we were going to execute this first phase of testing, and how we were going to execute that testing in a way that protected the test engine and make sure we didn't do any damage to it, and made sure that we completed all of these tests in a safe and responsible way. So I'd spent a long time going through all of the potential failure modes that we had to manage, all of the things that could potentially go wrong, and then developing from that a series of procedures, a series of processes, and distilling that down to a series of operational checklists that we could use on the day to be able to execute the tests reliably and safely and consistently with the plan. Right, 2 tests. Yeah. First one, cold cranking. This is really just making sure that we've got no strange mechanical noises, no rubs, and just to get a feel for using the starter generator. Yeah. So the idea is we're going to start it at 500 RPM, and then myself and Mark, we're going to have a little listen, a feel for mechanical while it's going quiet and while it's going slow. Eric, if you just keep an eye on the starter gen temperature, because this will be quite not a long test, but it'll be longer than a normal start cycle, albeit at the bottom end it's not pulling very much. So you call
if we get close to limits, we'll just stop.
Call time stop, let it cool down. You've got your forced air cooling, so it should prolong that a little. So the other thing that we want to try and get a feel for on that first test as well is that the lubrication system is behaving itself. So the main risk there's 2 main risks we've got to avoid: not cooking the bearings and not getting oil leaking into the gas path, because the engine will run on oil, and it'll just run away with M1, and you're going to struggle to turn it off then. And so if we start to see lots of oil coming out of the AGB, you're not scavenging enough, you've got to turn the inverter side. But we'll do this all very slowly and very gently while we're doing the cold runs.
Scavenge as well. When we start them, obviously scavenge first.
Scavenge first, there's very little volume for oil in the rear bearing housing, and there's only limited space in the AGB case, and if you get too much oil in there, when the engine's running faster, you'll rapidly churn that up into foam and generate loads of heat. Right, so with this first test, Eric, you set N1, so you just play with the voltage until you get to a speed of around 500, and then we're just going to look at everything and then increment it up by 500 RPMs, and then at some point you'll start seeing a temperature rise in the starter gen, and we might have to break off. And we'll go through that until basically we get to 15-18%. I'll expect we won't be able to go any further with the starter motor. Stop, give the starter a break, and then after that, as long as everyone's happy, we can go on to try and light it.
So what increments roughly again?
500 RPM if you can do it. If you don't have the control, we'll go up in 1000 RPM increments. We're really just listening for rubs, for any misbehavior in the lubrication system, and for any sign of vibration. So just sanity checking there's nothing major wrong mechanically. The startup sequence is the igniter's on, Yeah, fuel off, and then starter generator. For this one, we want it set at 28 volts, so it just accelerates as hard and as fast as it can.
Just ka-chunk it.
Ka-chunk it in, yeah. Ka-chunk it in, let it go. If we get it up and running, I'm going to run it for about 5 minutes, yeah. And just keep an eye on the bearing temperatures and the oil temperatures more than anything. Just look for any signs of smoke in the exhaust or that accessory gearbox vent down to the floor, because that's a sign that we're getting out of balance in the lube system, and we're pushing oil or oil mist where we don't want it. And that's it, really.
Given that this is the first time running our engine, we took it very conservatively. Initially, just testing all the supporting systems for the engine, the igniters, the lubrication system, making sure that oil is getting into the bearings and gears in the right places, checking the flow rates for everything there, temperatures of the lube system. And from there, we went a step further and started dry cranking the engine. This is just running the starter motor at a low speed continuously, making sure that there aren't any vibrations or mechanical issues, any rubs anywhere. So that's just feeling and listening to make sure that there's nothing wrong from a mechanical perspective with the rotor.
Once again, we bought the oil air cooler online. We bought the forced air cooling for the starter generator online. We got all of the instrumentation operational, bought the scavenge pumps online, bought the pressure pumps online, and then gradually started to wind up the voltage on the starter generator until N1 started to gradually climb for the very first time.
Not long.
And that's not at full voltage.
Yeah.
So that's about right.
I'm just saying
About like
quick
16 seconds.
that sounds about right. Yeah.
Once N1 had stabilized at its first set speed at around 1000 RPM, Mark and I went and inspected the engine at really close quarters, just looking for any signs of vibration, any strange noises, any indication whatsoever that anything was touching or rubbing, or any of the mechanical components were in any way unhappy, and there was absolutely nothing. So before long I was signaling to Eric to bring the speed up again, so he raised the voltage, he took it up again, and we essentially ran all the way up to 10,000 RPM relatively quickly. There was a very subtle rumble at about 3,000, which was just one of the accessory gearboxes, one of the accessory gears rattling ever so slightly because it was unloaded. But we soon passed through that, and the engine just ran beautifully smoothly all the way up until the point where the starter ran out of power and it couldn't push any harder. The balancing of the rotor was exquisite, and all of the vibration and the rotor dynamic characteristics were exactly what we were expecting. We couldn't have hoped for it to have run any better for a first engine. Then suddenly there's nothing else left to do. 30 years of your life have passed by leading to this moment, and now it's time to see if you can live up to all of those promises that you made. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So I was stood at the side and I could just see Eric, and he just said, "I'm out." And then Jason threw his arms in the air. And then that was it, self-sustaining.
I don't think I'll ever be able to explain how much of a big deal it was that it just worked, that it just worked out of the box.
I just remember looking at the screen, it was like 27,000 RPM.
That was an incredible moment to be a part of. It was surreal almost because, you know, this program has been going on for a few years. We've all been looking forward to this day to see this engine running, and to be a part of it there for the first time was an amazing experience.
We'd done a 23-hour shift and everyone was on their knees, but the adrenaline and the moment just got the better of them. It was great.
That moment, I don't think I've ever felt more alive in my whole life.
I didn't really know. We weren't planning to have it self-sustaining that night.
No.
And I think there's something very poetic about the engine taking its first breath as the sun came up at 3:51 in the morning after such a monumental effort from everybody involved. That's special.
It was special.
That's special.
Lived with me, that one.